All right, let's have an introductory look at the Thomistic cosmological argument. Thomas Aquinas was an Italian Dominican friar and priest. Aquinas was one of the towering intellects of an academic movement known as scholasticism during the High Middle Ages. He had a profound mind and was a prolific writer. Over the course of his short life, it's estimated that he penned or dictated more than 8 million words, covering a range of topics, including numerous commentaries, academic disputations, and works of theology and philosophy. He's been regarded by many as one of the greatest theologians and philosophers to ever have lived. Perhaps Aquinas' most important philosophical achievement was the way he synthesized and developed the best that classical philosophy, which began with the ancient Greeks, had to offer in his time. In the process, he uncovered deep insights into the nature of reality and discovered a powerful argument for the existence of God. And here we're going to summarize Aquinas' argument in kind of an expanded, explanatory form, rather than simply present it exactly as it appears in his own words. In our everyday experience, we encounter various kinds of beings that exist around us in the world. Dogs and cats, and people and birds, and trees and grass. There are two things, then, that are evident to all of us in our experience of things. Two things that we all know, even if we've never once reflected on this knowledge. First, we know that there are beings of various sorts or kinds. And second, we know that the beings of these various sorts or kinds actually exist. In other words, when it comes to our experience of things in the world, we know what things are, and we know that they are. To say that we know what a thing is simply to say that we know the thing's nature or essence. From a young age, we all naturally learn that the things of our experience fall into various kinds. We can group and classify natural beings based on their basic properties and powers, or upon what they are like and how they act. In other words, we don't experience isolated things that are utterly different and disassociated from other things. Rather, we experience individual things of different natures. We experience trees and flowers and elephants and whales and horses and humans. Each individual thing we encounter in the world has a nature or essence that makes it to be the kind of thing that it is, or that makes it to be what it is. To say that we know that a thing is simply to say that we know that the thing has existence. By the very act of experiencing things in the world, we come to know that things exist. We know immediately that they are not nothing, and that they have real existence in the world, and not just in our minds. Now, if we were to reflect carefully on this basic knowledge of beings that we all have, our knowledge of what things are on the one hand, and that they are on the other, we can come to see that there must be a real distinction between essence and existence. That is, there must be a real distinction between the nature or essence of a thing and the act of existence that makes the thing a reality, or that accounts for the fact that it exists rather than not. We can show that this must be the case in several ways. First is the fact that we can know the essence of a thing without knowing whether the thing actually exists. To see this, imagine that you meet a person who has never heard of lions, pterodactyls, or unicorns. Suppose that you give this person a detailed description of the nature of each of these creatures, and then you tell him that among these three, one of them exists, one of them used to exist but no longer exists, and one of them has never existed. You now ask the person to determine which is which, based solely on the description of the creature's natures. Now, obviously, the person in this scenario would be unable to do so, but this means that the existence of these creatures must really be distinct from their natures or essences. If they were not, then a person should be able to know which creature exists and which doesn't simply by knowing the creature's essence. As philosopher Edward Feser explains, quote, "What a thing is part of its objective reality. The biological facts about lions and pterodactyls would be exactly the same whether or not we were around to study them. This would be true of unicorns too, if there were any unicorns. And if a thing exists, then its existence too is obviously part of its objective reality. So, if the essence and existence of a thing were not distinct features of reality, then knowing the former should suffice for knowing the latter. Yet it doesn't." End quote. We can also know that there must be a distinction between essence and existence because the things of our experience are contingent. As we saw when we looked at the Leibnizian cosmological argument, something is contingent if it exists but doesn't have to exist. A contingent being is a being that can possibly not exist. As an example of a contingent being, just think about yourself. You obviously exist. This fact is actually undeniable for you while you're thinking about it. But you don't have to exist. In fact, there was a time when you didn't exist. And if the history of the world had gone slightly different than it has, say your father had never met your mother, then you would not now exist. However, if your existence were not really distinct from your nature or your essence, if your existence was the same as or a part of your essence, then you would have existence by virtue of your nature. But then you would not be a contingent being, a being who could possibly not exist. You would instead be a necessary being, or a being who could not possibly not exist. You would exist by the necessity of your own nature. So since the things of our experience are in fact contingent, we can know that there must be a real distinction between the essence and existence of these things. A third reason we can know that there's a real distinction between essence and existence in the things of our experience is because if there were a being whose essence and existence were not distinct, there could only, in principle, be one such being. Why? Well, consider that if essence and existence were not really distinct in such a being, then they would be the same or identical in that being. Such a being, if it were to exist, would have an essence that just is existence itself. Its essence or nature would be to be. Another way to say this is that if there were a being in whom essence and existence were identical, then that being would be pure existence. Or as Aquinas puts it, such a being would be subsisting existence itself. Now, in order for there to be more than one such being, more than one being whose essence and existence are identical, there would have to be some way to multiply or distinguish one such being from another of the same sort. But it doesn't seem possible to do this. To see why, consider the kinds of ways that we distinguish or differentiate one being from another. One way is to distinguish different kinds of beings in terms of the logical category of genus and species. A genus is a more general class of thing and species more specific class of thing. So, for example, under the genus animal, there will be various species or kinds of animals that can be distinguished by their natures or their specific difference. So, a human animal is distinguished from other animals because it has, in addition to its animality, a rational nature, thus making it a rational animal. A horse is distinguished from other animals by the specific nature it has in addition to its animality. A chicken is distinguished from other animals by the specific nature it has in addition to its animality, and so on. In this way, we can differentiate different kinds of beings within the logical category of genus. But a being who is just existence itself cannot possibly be differentiated as species are in a genus. To do this, we'd have to say that existence itself were a logical class or genus, and then we'd have to identify various species of this genus, existence itself, by their specific differences. But then each species would no longer be just existence itself, but rather existence plus this specific difference, or existence plus that specific difference. So a being who is pure existence itself cannot be multiplied as species are multiplied in a genus. Of course, things are not only differentiated as being various species within a logical class of genus, but also by being various individuals or members in the logical class of species. So, for example, within the species human, we can distinguish various human beings. For example, there's Larry, Curly, and Moe. What differentiates one human being from another, or one member of any species from another member of the same species, is that each individual in that species is associated with a different parcel of matter, or a body, that allows for unique properties and characteristics. So Larry is humanity plus this body. Curly is humanity plus this body. And Moe is humanity plus this body. Now, it should be obvious why a being that is just existence itself could not possibly be differentiated in this way. If it were so distinguished, then it would not be just existence itself, but existence plus this body, or existence plus that body. So a being who is pure existence itself cannot be multiplied as individuals are multiplied in a species. Now, as the logic of multiplication shows, in order for something to be multiplied, it has to be subject to something that multiplies it. It must be in potency to some principle of multiplication. But a being who is pure existence itself cannot possibly be subject to anything, since outside of that which is pure existence itself, there is nothing to be subject to. A being who just is existence itself cannot be bound. It cannot be restricted. It cannot be determined in its being in any way. It would be a being of pure actuality, utterly devoid of potentiality. This means that it cannot even in principle be subject to multiplication. Therefore, if there is a being whose essence and existence are not distinct but identical, there could only possibly be one such being. Now, since it's obvious that the beings of our experience can be and are multiplied and differentiated from each other as various species in a genus or as various individuals or members of a species are, they cannot be the one and unique being in whom essence and existence are identical. They therefore must be beings in whom essence and existence are really distinct. So upon careful reflection of our experience of things in the world, we can see that they must be composed of two really distinct metaphysical principles. Essence accounts for what a thing is, or the nature of a thing, and existence accounts for the fact that a thing having a nature actually exists in the mind-independent world. Now, you may be wondering what all this has to do with an argument for the existence of God. After all, so far we've just identified some metaphysical principles for the things of our experience. However, upon further reflection, it's not hard to see that the principles we've identified indicate causal dependencies. A question naturally arises. If essence and existence are really distinct aspects and things, how is it that they come together? How is it that a thing of a certain nature or essence has existence? It is this question that will lead us to the existence of God. In answer to this question, Aquinas reasons that there are only two possible ways that something can be had or belong to a thing, two ways that some property or aspect or feature can be caused in a thing. He writes, quote, "Whatever belongs to a thing is either caused by the principles of its nature or comes to it from an extrinsic principle," end quote. Let's briefly look at each of these options in turn. The first way some property can be had by a thing is for that property to be caused by the principles of the thing's own nature. Now, for something to be caused by the principles of a thing's nature is for it to follow from or to flow from a thing's nature. In other words, the having of the property in question is part of the built-in potential of the essence of the thing that is able to have it. Such a property is derived from, it's dependent on, it's caused by or explained by the nature or the essence of the thing that has the property. Aquinas offers risibility, or the ability to laugh, in humans as an example of this. The distinctly human ability to laugh flows from and is grounded in the essence or the nature of a human being as a rational animal. Humans can laugh because they are rational. The potential to laugh derives from the essence of humanity. So perhaps then existence is like this. It's like risibility in humans. It just flows from a thing's nature and is caused by the essence of a thing. So can we explain how the things of our experience have existence in this way? Aquinas' answer is no. He writes, quote, "It cannot be that the existence of a thing is caused by the form or quiddity or nature of that thing, because then something would be its own cause and would bring itself into existence, which is impossible," end quote. As Aquinas explains, the reason why existence cannot be caused by the principles of a thing's nature is because in order for a nature to cause its own existence, the thing with a nature must already exist. But then it would have to exist before it existed. But that's incoherent. It's a logical impossibility. No, nothing can impart existence to itself or cause its own existence. There is simply no way that a thing's existence can be caused by the principles of its own nature. But if the existence of a thing cannot be caused by the principles of a thing's nature, it must be caused by an external source, or from an extrinsic principle or cause. That is to say, for any being in which essence and existence are really distinct, existence must be added or caused by something external to that being. Again, our everyday experience bears this out. The beings of which we are familiar in the world have causes of their existence. To illustrate how something receives its existence from an external cause, Aquinas wants us to consider how the air or atmosphere is illuminated from the influence of the sun. There is nothing inherent to the air that causes it to be illuminated. Rather, the light in the air is due to the influence of an external agent, namely the sun. Likewise, because existence is not inherent or included in the nature of the beings of our experience, it too must be added to those beings from the outside. Now, before moving on, we should stop to reflect on where we've come so far. By means of some careful philosophical reflection upon our everyday experience of the world, we've seen that essence and existence are distinguished in things. We've also seen that essence and existence are really distinct in things. And finally, we've seen that in all things in whom essence and existence are distinct, existence must be added to essence by an external cause. And here I want you to see that this existential dependency of things on an external cause for their existence is even more radical than you might think. This is because what we've said so far about the dependency of beings for their existence on an external cause applies not only when a being first begins to exist, but for as long as that being exists. The reason is that essence and existence remain really distinct in a thing at every moment in which the thing exists, so that at every moment of the thing's existence, it will be dependent for its existence on something external to it. To see this, let's think about some being, say, a chicken. We've already established that the nature or essence of this chicken must be distinct from the existence of the chicken. We've also established that existence cannot possibly follow from or flow from the nature of the chicken or be caused by the chicken in any way. So if the chicken is to exist, its existence must be imparted to it or caused in it by something external to it. However, what's true of the chicken at the moment of its first existence remains true of the chicken throughout its existence. At every moment of the chicken's life, it's a being whose essence and existence are really distinct, and a being who must therefore receive its existence from an external cause. This means that for the chicken to exist right now, its existence must be caused to exist right now. If its existence were not caused to exist right now, the chicken would cease to exist right now. It would be annihilated. So the existence of the chicken is never imparted to it by the principles of its own nature. The chicken can't be imparting existence to itself here and now any more than it could have when it first began to exist. And for the same reason, a chicken can't do anything at any time unless it first exists at that time. The idea of something imparting existence to itself here and now is just as incoherent as the idea of a being imparting existence to itself when it first begins to exist. Anything, then, whose essence and existence are really distinct must have a cause of its existence at every moment in which it exists. Now, this is true not only of the things whose existence is being caused, but of the thing that is doing the causing as well. If whatever is imparting existence to something right now is also something in which essence and existence are distinct, well, then it too will need its own existence imparted to it right now by an external cause. But such a series cannot regress infinitely, but must terminate in a being who does not require its existence to be imparted to it by some distinct cause. In other words, it must terminate in a being whose essence and existence are not distinct, but identical, in a being who just is existence itself. All right, to unpack this, let's consider a causal series in which every being in the series is receiving its existence from a prior being in the series. So being A is receiving its existence from being B, which is receiving its existence from being C, which is receiving its existence from being D, and so on to infinity. For the sake of simplicity, we can imagine that this happens all at once, rather than happening over time. Observe that each member in this series is completely dependent on a prior cause for its own existence. Moreover, each member of the series can impart existence to another only insofar as it's receiving existence from another. We can say then that the power had by the members of the series to impart existence is a derived and borrowed power, rather than being a power that's inherent or built in. We can also say that the causality exercised by each member of the series is instrumental. To illustrate what this means, consider a stick that's used to move a stone. Because the stick has no inherent or built-in power to move itself, if it's going to move the stone, it must itself be moved by another using it, as an instrument of motion, in this case, a man. The power of the stick to move the stone is therefore instrumental. Likewise, since none of the members of our series has the built-in power to exist on its own, it can only impart existence as it receives existence from some prior member. Now, I think that it's easy to see that this series must have a first or primary member. There must be a being which does not need to receive its existence from a prior cause. A being who has existence built in or in an inherent way. A being who just is existence itself. So let's think about this. Let's go back to the hand that moves the stick that moves the stone. If you take away the cause, in this case the man, who has the inherent power to move, well, then you take away the movement in the series of stick and stone. Likewise, if you take away the cause, who has the inherent power to exist, well, then you take away the existence in the series of the members receiving and imparting existence. So there must be a first and primary ground or source of existence for such a series to exist. And notice that this is true even if the causal series were infinite. Making the series infinite does nothing whatsoever to avoid the necessity of a primary cause of existence. Supposing that an infinite chain of existentially dependent causes could actually cause existence apart from a primary cause of existence is like supposing that an infinite chain of IOUs could actually possess any monetary value. Or it's like supposing that an infinite chain of zeros could ever add up to 1. To illustrate further how making the series infinite does no good, think about a paintbrush. A paintbrush has no built-in power to move itself. Its power to move is completely derived and instrumental. It can move only insofar as it's moved by another. Simply changing the length of the handle won't make a difference. In fact, the paintbrush would still lack the power to move itself, even if its handle were infinitely long. The paintbrush can only move as the instrument of something else that has the built-in power to move. Or consider another illustration, a series of connected power strips. Each power strip can transfer electricity only insofar as it receives electricity from a prior power strip. Now, of course, there could be no power to transfer unless this series of power strips was connected to an outlet or a source of power. Now, this is true even if the series of power strips is infinite. Notice also that the first cause of existence is first in the sense of being the primary member, and it's not first in the sense of being the first in a temporal series. The argument isn't saying that there needs to be a cause of the beginning of the series at some point in the finite past, as we argued in the Kalam cosmological argument, but rather that there needs to be a first cause, here and now, in order for anything to exist here and now. We can call a causal series that is temporal or spread out over time a horizontal causal series. In such a series, each member is preceded by another in time. Recall that in the Kalam cosmological argument, we argued that there had to be a cause at the beginning of the series, a cause that brought the universe into existence in the finite past. In distinction from this horizontal causal series ordered temporally through time, there is what we can call a vertical causal series. Such a series does not necessarily involve causes ordered through time, but is rather concerned with a causal series that is ordered ontologically, or by different levels of reality, at any moment of time. The Thomistic argument is concerned with such a vertical causal series. It's arguing that unless there exists a primary cause of existence, or an ontological ground of existence, who bestows existence here and now, none of the members of the series would exist here and now. The Thomistic argument thus does not depend on there being a beginning to the universe in the finite past, and goes through even if the universe is infinite in the past. Okay, let's see if we can somewhat formally summarize the basic thrust of the Thomistic cosmological argument. When we reflect on the beings of our experience, we can know two aspects about them. First, that they are beings of certain types with certain natures or essences. And second, that they have existence, that they exist in reality, and not just as ideas in the mind. Upon further reflection over the essence and existence of things, we can come to see that there must be a real distinction between them. Now, this led us to identify a causal dependency at the very heart of beings, in whom essence and existence are distinct. Because existence is not included in and does not follow or flow from the essence of such a being, and because a thing cannot impart existence to itself, in order for the being to exist here and now, existence must be imparted to the essence here and now by an external cause. However, if that which imparts existence here and now to a being is also itself a being in which essence and existence are distinct, it too will require an external cause to impart existence here and now to its essence. But this causal series cannot be infinite. It must have a primary cause, a cause that can impart existence to beings here and now without needing anything to impart existence to it here and now. But then such a primary cause could not have an essence that is distinct from its existence. Therefore, there exists a being in whom essence and existence are not distinct, but identical, a being whose essence just is existence itself, a being who is subsisting existence itself. Now, as we did with the other cosmological arguments that we've looked at, we can ask, why should we think that this being is God? Well, I think upon further philosophical reflection of what this being must be like, we can quite readily see that there can simply be no other possible candidate. Recall that if there were a being whose essence and existence is identical, there could not be in principle more than one such being. This being must therefore be one and unique. And since this being just is existence itself, it cannot possibly not exist. But that's just to say that it's a necessary being. Moreover, because essence and existence are identical in this being, but distinct in every other being that exists, it must be the uncaused cause of the existence of everything other than itself. So, at the very least, this being is the one, unique, necessary, uncaused cause of everything that exists other than itself. And as Aquinas would say, this is what Christians mean by the word God. But more could be said here, a lot more in fact. Aquinas himself dedicates hundreds of pages in his Summa Theologica to rigorous philosophical analysis of the nature of this being. There he goes on to argue that, among other things, and in addition to the divine attributes already mentioned, this being must also be simple, perfect, good, infinite, immutable, eternal, immaterial, omnipotent, and personal, or having an intellect and will. The Thomistic cosmological argument, if it goes through, and I'm convinced that it does, not only shows that God exists, but it reveals to us the radical dependency of all things on God. Ever since the Enlightenment, it's been popular to imagine the universe like a finely tuned clock, and God as a clockmaker. On such a view, God's work of creation is in the past. He designed the clock, he made it in the beginning, but has since removed his hands from it, leaving it to run according to its own devices. But for Aquinas, this deistic view of God is absurd. Because all things depend at every moment on God for their existence, if God were ever to remove his hands, as it were, everything would immediately cease to exist. Aquinas' argument shows that every being that exists depends on God for its existence for as long as it exists. The proper analogy of God's relation to creation, then, is not that of a clock on the shelf of a clockmaker, but that of a song on the voice of one who is singing. Just as the song exists only as it's being sung, so the world exists only as it's being created. Creation is not a one-time act of God that occurred at some point in the past. It's an unending act, causing all things that are to be. If Aquinas' argument goes through, then it tells us something remarkable about God and his relation to the world. It tells us that God is both radically transcendent from and utterly different than all created beings, and that he is radically immanent and intimately near to all created beings. Writes Aquinas, quote, "Since God is existence itself through his essence, created existence must be his proper effect. And God causes this effect in things not only when they first begin to exist, but also for as long as they are conserved in existence, just as the sun causes light in the air, for as long as the air remains illuminated. Therefore, for as long as a thing has existence, God must be present to it in a way befitting the existence it has. But existence is that which is most intimate to any given thing, and that which is in all things most deeply. Hence, it must be the case that God exists within all things, and intimately so."